It was 6 a.m., just like any other Friday morning. The air in Asheville still held that crisp, cold bite, even in March. I was turning onto my daughter Clara's street, a brown paper bag from Millie's Diner on the passenger seat, 2 coffees steaming gently. This was our ritual, born quietly over years after my wife, Elena, passed. A small, comforting constant in a world that often felt too big and too quiet without her. But this Friday, something was wrong. The porch light was off. Clara always left it on for me, a silent signal that the door was open, a small, shared understanding between us. Its absence stopped me cold. Then I saw them. 2 suitcases sitting at the bottom of the porch steps, side by side, as if dropped in a hurry. And there, on the cold concrete between them, sat my daughter Clara, clutching my 4-year-old granddaughter, Nora. Nora's head was tucked under Clara's chin, her small body rising and falling with the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. But Clara wasn't sleeping. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly across the dark front yard. Even from the driveway, I could see her shoulders shaking, the kind of shaking that comes when tears have run dry, but the body hasn't gotten the message yet. I got out of the car, the paper bag still in my hand. I set it on the hood without thinking. "Clara," I said, my voice low, not wanting to startle Nora. She looked up, and her face crumpled all over again. Her chin trembled, fresh tears spilled, and she pressed her lips together, fighting to hold back a sound. "Daddy," she whispered, and that single word hit me with a force I hadn't felt since Elena's last breath. I crossed the yard in 4 strides and crouched down in front of her. My hand went to her knee, the other to Nora's back. "Tell me what happened," I said, looking her in the eye. She shook her head, not in refusal, but fighting for control. She swallowed hard, twice. "He changed the locks," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "Last night, while Nora and I were asleep, I woke up this morning, and my key didn't work. He wouldn't answer the door, and I didn't know where else to go." My gaze fell on the 2 suitcases. 2. After 7 years of marriage, 2 suitcases on a cold porch in March was what Julian Cross had decided Clara's life amounted to. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, just as I used to when she was small. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you home." She started to protest, that instinct people have to insist they're fine. "Clara," I said, quietly but firmly, "let me take you home." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, then nodded, carefully shifting Nora in her arms. I carried the suitcases to my car. They were heavier than I expected. Back at my house, I settled Nora onto the sofa under the old quilt Elena had made. The little girl barely stirred, just tucked her knees up and sighed, the way children do when they feel safe enough to surrender to sleep. Clara sat at my kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, staring at the steam. Her eyes were dry now, but raw and puffy. She looked younger than her 31 years and, somehow, much older at the same time. "How long has it been like this?" I asked, sitting across from her. She let out a long, unsteady breath. "A while," she said. "I just kept thinking it would get better." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I kept thinking I was the problem. I had so many things I wanted to say, 15 different arguments and reassurances. But I looked at my daughter, sitting there in my kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, with everything she owned in 2 suitcases, and I understood that what she needed right then was not my words. So I kept them. Later, after Clara had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about what Clara had said. He changed the locks, not in a fit of rage, not in the middle of an argument. Sometime in the night, quietly, while his wife and daughter slept down the hall, Julian Cross had arranged for a locksmith to come and change every lock in that house. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 64 years old. For 35 years, I worked as a head librarian and records manager at the Asheville Public Library. People picture a quiet old man behind a desk, stamping books. They don't understand that information is power, and the person who knows where everything is kept is never as powerless as they look. Elena used to say I could find a needle in a haystack because I'd already cataloged every piece of hay. She wasn't wrong. Sitting at that table in the dark, listening to my daughter breathe in the next room, I made her a silent promise. I would find everything Julian Cross had hidden. Every document, every record, every thread he thought no one would ever pull. And I would not stop until Clara and Nora were safe. I opened the drawer beside the stove, took out a fresh notepad and a pen. The next morning, I called Walter Sterling, a retired judge and an old friend. He was a man who understood the intricacies of the law and, more importantly, the subtle currents of human nature. I told him what had happened, keeping my voice steady, though my insides were churning. Walter listened patiently, his silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finished, he simply said, "Arthur, I'll make some calls. Get me everything you have on Julian." And so began my quiet war. My library skills, honed over decades, became my weapon. I started with the public records, the kind of mundane documents that most people never look at. Property deeds, marriage certificates, business filings. Julian Cross was a real estate developer, or so he claimed. His company, Cross Holdings, seemed legitimate enough on the surface. But the deeper I dug, the more I found inconsistencies. Shell corporations, shuffled assets, loans taken out against properties that seemed to disappear from his portfolio. I spent weeks, then months, hunched over my desk, a fresh notepad always open. I cross-referenced names, dates, and addresses. I learned about Miller's reports, the kind of detailed financial investigations that uncover hidden assets and fraudulent transactions. Walter put me in touch with a forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, who could untangle the most convoluted financial webs. She confirmed my suspicions. Julian Cross wasn't just a bad husband. He was a con artist. The most shocking discovery came when I found a post-nuptial agreement, signed by Clara, buried deep in a pile of documents. It essentially signed away her rights to any marital assets, leaving her with nothing. But the signature, it looked off. A deep fake, Sarah called it, a sophisticated forgery. And the timing of it, signed just weeks after Julian had convinced Clara to invest a significant portion of her inheritance into one of his promising new ventures. A venture that, of course, had vanished without a trace. Then there was the house itself, the one Julian had kicked Clara and Nora out of. It had been mortgaged to the hilt, the equity drained to support another household. Another household. That phrase echoed in my mind. Julian had a secret family, another wife, and children, living in a different city. He had been systematically siphoning off Clara's inheritance, taking out loans in her name, all to fund his double life. The weight of this information was crushing. I kept it all to myself for 16 months, meticulously building the case. Walter advised me to wait, to gather every piece of evidence, to make sure our attack would be decisive. "You're going to have to tell her some of it," he had said. "Not yet, but soon." I remember one night, sitting at my kitchen table, the number in my head, $2 million, in Clara's name, gone. While Nora was learning to walk on the hardwood floor of a house whose equity had already been drained to support another household. I wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. Time to move. The next morning, I called the number Walter had given me. Marcus Webb. A measured, unhurried voice answered. "My name is Arthur Vance," I said. "Walter Sterling suggested I call you. I have a situation in Asheville that I believe requires your particular kind of attention." There was a brief pause. "Tell me about it," Marcus Webb said. I drove to Charlotte on a Friday morning in the second week of December, a 3-hour drive through the long descent from the mountains. I had made this drive many times, but never for a reason like this. Marcus Webb's office was on the 14th floor of a glass and steel building on South Tryon Street. He met me himself, a man in his mid-50s with a lean, disciplined physicality. He had gray at his temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a handshake that communicated attention without theater. "Mr. Vance," he said, "come on back." His office had 2 windows facing south, and the December light came through them at a low angle. I laid the materials out on the table beside his desk, the folder I had assembled over the preceding 16 months, organized chronologically with a summary index at the front. Miller's reports, Walter's notes, the mortgage documents, the birth certificate, the postnuptial agreement with its irregular signatures, Gary Whitfield's email chain, the USB drive and its paper sleeve. Webb went through it without speaking for 40 minutes. I drank my coffee and looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline, thinking about Elena, who had always said the mountains were better than the city, but the city had its uses. When Webb finished, he took his reading glasses off his forehead and set them on the desk. "The deep-fake signature on the loan application," he said. "That's federal." "I assumed as much," I replied. "Wire fraud, potentially bank fraud, depending on the institution's federal insurance status." He tapped the postnuptial agreement. "This I can challenge. North Carolina courts have overturned postnuptial agreements signed under conditions that suggest coercion or material misrepresentation. Given the timeline of what was happening in that marriage when she signed this, we have a strong argument." He looked at the mortgage documents, the equity extraction. "This is a clear pattern of financial abuse and fraud." The meeting with Marcus Webb marked a turning point. The quiet, solitary work was over. Now, it was time for action. Webb's team moved swiftly, filing motions, gathering more evidence, preparing for the legal battle ahead. It was a complex case, involving multiple jurisdictions and layers of deception, but Webb was confident. Then came the hardest part, telling Clara. I had rehearsed the conversation countless times in my head, but nothing could prepare me for the look on her face as I laid out Julian's betrayals. The shock, the disbelief, then the slow, dawning horror. She cried, not the quiet, exhausted tears of that March morning, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs of anger and pain. Nora, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, clung to her mother, her small face mirroring Clara's distress. It was a brutal conversation, but necessary. Protection without communication is still a form of loneliness. I told her everything, from the forged signatures to the hidden family, the systematic draining of her inheritance. It was a burning house, and I finally had to tell her there was a fire. The legal process was long and arduous. Julian fought back, of course, denying everything, trying to discredit Clara and me. But the evidence was overwhelming. My meticulous records, Sarah Chen's forensic analysis, Walter Sterling's legal insights, and Marcus Webb's strategic brilliance proved to be an unstoppable force. Julian Cross was eventually arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. The legal system, slow as it sometimes is, began to grind. Clara, with Webb's help, filed for divorce and pursued civil charges to reclaim what was hers. 16 months after that cold March morning, the dust began to settle. The house Julian had kicked them out of was eventually sold, and a portion of the proceeds, along with other recovered assets, went to Clara. It wasn't everything she had lost, but it was a start. Julian's carefully constructed empire of lies crumbled, and he faced the consequences of his actions. On a cold December afternoon, Nora's 5th birthday, our house was filled with laughter and the scent of Elena's apple cake. Nora was wearing a paper crown, decorated with crayon drawings of what appeared to be either horses or very large dogs. She wore it, with the absolute authority of someone who had received a well-deserved honor. Walter found me in the front hallway, pulling on my jacket. "How does it feel?" he asked, his question direct, without decoration. "Strange," I said honestly. "Not bad. Strange." He nodded. "That's the correct answer. I keep looking for the next thing to do," I said. 16 months of always having a next thing, and now there isn't one. "There will be," Walter said. "Different things, not these things." He shook my hand, a firm, unhurried handshake, and walked to his car, through the cold December evening. I helped Clara carry the last of the paper plates to the recycling bin. I kissed Nora on the top of her head while she was occupied with the puzzle box Walter had made, turning it in her small hands with the concentrated focus of someone approaching an interesting problem. She hadn't opened it yet. She was still learning its shape. "Grandpa," she said without looking up, "do you know how it opens?" "I think you'll figure it out," I said. She accepted this without argument, which told me she believed it. I drove home in the dark, through streets that were beginning to put up their December lights. At home, I put Elena's recipe card back in the wooden box, and washed the cake pan. The kitchen was quiet. In that particular way it got quiet when Nora and Clara were not in it. A real quiet, rather than an absence. The kind that had come to feel companionable, rather than empty. I sat at the table. I did not open any drawer. I did not take out a pen. I sat there for a while in the quiet, and thought about what Walter had said. Different things, not these things. Outside, the December cold pressed softly against the windows, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's lights came on. One more house added to the gathering brightness, and I sat with that for a moment, which was enough. Looking back at this family story, I carry one thought heavier than all the rest. I kept my silence for 16 months. I told myself it was strategy. Some of that was true, but some of it was fear. The fear of saying out loud what I already knew, and watching my daughter's face when she heard it. Do not be like me in that way. If someone you love is standing inside a burning house, do not wait until you have a perfect exit plan before you tell them there is fire. Protection without communication is still a form of loneliness. I also believe, and this is my own view, that truth has a way of surviving. You can forge signatures, build hollow companies, commit family betrayal on a scale that seems impossible to unravel. But the truth stays in the record. Someone always keeps a copy. I am not a religious man by habit, but sitting by that fire in November, watching 16 months of notes turn to ash, I thanked God quietly for Elena, who taught me how to pay attention. For Clara, who was braver than I deserved. For Nora, who still believes her paper crown is structurally sound. Every family story carries weight. This family story nearly broke me, but it also showed me what I was still capable of at 64, with a notepad and enough patience to wait for the truth to surface. And no family betrayal, however carefully constructed, survives that kind of patience forever.